mental health matters. My name is Jochen Spangenberg. I work for Deutsche Welle Research and Cooperation Projects, and I have been working in the field of disinformation detection, verification for the past 10 years or so, since 2013. And well, I'm going to be talking about dealing with potentially disturbing digital content in order to avoid trauma and guarding mental health. Because the reason why I'm doing that is very simple. Mental health matters. So I will be focusing on those who are dealing and working on the digital frontline, namely those investigators who spend a lot of time in front of computers analyzing and verifying digital content. Because those people have to face and are confronted with a lot of potentially traumatizing and gruesome imagery. Take the situation in Ukraine, take the situation in Gaza and Israel. There's a lot of disturbing and potentially traumatizing material out there. But it's also in the normal news cycle, whether it's reporting about the refugee situation, whether it's about accidents or human or natural catastrophes. Those dealing with digital content are exposed to such material on a very, very frequent basis. Now, what I'm talking about here is secondary or vicarious trauma. So what is that? So the way I define that is a condition resulting from exposure to traumatic content indirectly, for example, via screens. So not something that you experience firsthand, like say as a direct eyewitness, but something that you experience by watching something on screen, on digital media, on a social news feed or what have you. So not directly seeing that, but relayed via usually a medium. So that's my working definition. And people who are suffering from it can have certain symptoms, but this is just like a small number that may occur or may not occur. It really depends on the individual. But it could be, for example, excessive use of drugs or other substances, alcohol abuse, being withdrawn temporarily from social activity, not being able to connect, being increasingly introvert, feeling detached from other people, the difficulty to relate to mundane or ordinary concerns of ordinary life or so, but also being short-tempered, easily irritable. This can be some symptoms, but not necessarily. So take it with a pinch of salt. I'm not a psychologist, but this could be signs in somebody who's not well. I want to give some advice, some concrete advice, namely for management, so those who are responsible first, and second, for digital investigators like journalists or human rights investigators. Well, one thing management should do, they should provide a supportive work atmosphere. So supporting each other, being there for each other, not taking things lightly. So it's easily said, but it's something that I consider very important. Another thing that sometimes is forgotten is provide a pleasant working atmosphere. So have light, windows ideally, not lock somebody up in a basement without artificial light or so. Put in some plant, colors and what have you, and you may be surprised, but it really has a big impact on the mental well-being, because if you have to watch and view gruesome imagery day in, day out, so at least you want to do that in a sort of pleasant setting. I think we still need to destigmatize this topic more, because there's still some sort of like stigma around it. So if you're suffering some mental illness, people often don't want to talk about it. I think we need to be open about this. It's just an illness like any other. Providing an atmosphere where people talk about these matters is also important, where nothing feels ashamed of admitting to suffering some negative consequence. What I find very important on the side of management is provide professional support. Ideally, you provide for your staff a 24/7 helpline, something or some people can turn to, like psychologists on call. Something that is also has low entry barriers, like do not make it difficult. Important also, establish very clear guidelines how you deal with potentially traumatizing content. This concerns the archiving, the sending of it. Again, as I said, do not make anybody come across gruesome imagery without them being prepared. So that's why you have to establish and enforce clear guidelines. Because if you don't, and somebody, one of your staff breaks down, then it's often too late. Second, I want to focus on digital investigators, and they can be journalists, they can be human rights investigators, but I'm focusing in particular on the profession of journalists. What should they do in order to guard their mental well-being? Starting off, awareness. Journalists need to be aware that this is a serious issue. Even journalists sometimes aren't fully aware of it and take it lightly. Be aware that this can have very serious negative consequences on yourself, on your loved ones, on your mental well-being. The next thing, I've hinted at that already, is up your guards. If you up your guards, meaning preparing yourself, like say you go into work and you know that you are potentially going to be exposed to nasty stuff, gruesome imagery, that really is already a protection mechanism. So that's why it's also important that people shouldn't come across anything potentially traumatizing without preparation, without having the guards up. Know your triggers. Different people are triggered by different things. I, for example, get triggered a lot by children when anything cruel is done to children. That triggers me very easily, not surprisingly, because I have children myself, and I think, or I know, that a lot of people have children or react to cruelty done to children when they have to witness that. The sound, I wasn't aware of it, but sound can get deeper into the human mind than visual, than imagery. So important, when you do an investigation and you know there could be something really nasty coming up, turn off the sound. Do not have the sound on permanently. Only turn the sound on when it's needed. Video, imagery. Say you're investigating a video. Do not have it on a huge screen, but minimize it. Make it small, so it's as small as possible. And also when you're doing investigations in social networks, have autoplay disabled. Often videos play automatically, but you can do that in the settings that they only play when you want them to play. You want to be in control, not the social network. Something I always do is I always have post-its ready. If I do an investigation, having post-its, little pieces of paper ready that you can sort of put onto the screen, is sometimes extremely useful. Not digital, but sometimes on non-digital things can be really helpful little things. But what is very important, no matter where you work, separate your private life from your working life. So working sort of in your bedroom, for example, is not a good idea, because if you have to view and investigate, verify a beheading in your bedroom, and then you try to go to sleep there a few hours later, that certainly you can almost be guaranteed that that is not ideal. If you break down, it's no benefit to anybody, and then you can't do your work anymore. So that's why self-care is so important. It may sometimes come across as selfish. I sometimes feel like it. How can I just look after myself when there's people being killed and suffering or so? But as I said, if you don't look after yourself, then nobody benefits. Go to a specialist, which are usually psychologists, because as I said at the beginning, it is an illness, and illnesses need to be treated, and they need to be attended by specialists who really know how to support and how to help. Because, and this brings me almost to the end, it is important, mental health matters, and you do not want to learn it the hard way. And the fact that it shouldn't be taken lightly is just, I'm using a quote here by a BBC journalist called Stuart Hughes, who lost a leg in the Iraq War, and he said in a conversation with Anthony Feinstein, who is one of the leading figures in this field, he said, had he known what he was going through regarding the psychological injury, he would have happily given his second leg if he could have traded it in for not suffering any mental harms. We have also done some research in that field. Me in my role as somebody working for Deutsche Welle Research and Cooperation Project with a research institute called CERT. And what we've done there is, first of all, we've developed algorithms that detect gruesome imagery, That is the first step. And then the second step is to use different filters that are laid over this imagery. And instead of blurring a picture completely where you can't see anything and you don't know what it's about, these different filters give you a different granularity or alienate an image to a certain extent, but still allow the viewer and give them an idea of what the image is about. So this can be very helpful for investigators, and it's still in the trial period. What we've done so far is we've asked journalists and investigators which filters they find more useful, and more work is needed. But this is a very promising sort of early stage research that we are currently conducting. So we are also always trying to support investigators and researchers in that field. For me personally, this is something that I really do to sort of switch off completely. I have a friend who's got a farm, so if I'm on my tractor and out there in nature with animals or so, this is something that I use for compensation. But everybody's different and everybody has different techniques. Hope you find your own techniques